Welcome, everybody. Really excited to present a series of workshops all about your life in the training stages, graduate school, postdoctoral training, all the time period in preceding you beginning an independent research career. All of the workshops that we're going over today are inspired by the separate parts of a new book that came out in April, The Early Career Researcher's Toolbox. We've designed these workshops with the assumption that the book is new to you, and we left some time open to address any questions you might have near the end. So we're going to do a series of things over the next 75 minutes. We're going to talk a bit about how to conceptualize mentoring relationships. That's going to help us understand how mentors vary from each other and on key characteristics that are relevant to doctoral and postdoctoral training. We'll talk a bit about finding mentors who fit your preferences and your learning style and all kinds of things that are important to your own training. And then we'll end off today with some strategies, pieces of advice on how to work with current mentors among those of you who are already in a mentoring relationship. And so you might be sort of asking, what do I mean by mentoring? What do we mean by mentoring in research? Well, we started to provide an answer to that question with a little bit of homework that I asked you to complete before our time together. And it concerned a short movie clip of about 3 minutes in length that actually shows the first time that Spider-Man meets Iron Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe of films. And why did I ask you to look at this? Well, I asked you because it was kind of like a perspective induction. Now, some of us are familiar with mood inductions that we might use in our own experimental research, where you're trying to guide participants into feeling a certain way before you expose them to study stimuli. This is kind of the same way. Only instead of inducing your mood, I wanted to induce your perspective. So I asked you before viewing this clip to think back to the beginning of your training, to the start of a mentoring relationship with yours, maybe somebody who mentored you in your undergraduate years, or mentoring you right now, or mentoring you during your postdoctoral years currently. And think about the very first time you met them, the very first meeting you had. And the reason why I asked you to do that is because this clip embodies a lot of the different aspects of mentoring relationships. It just happens to be that it's one comic book character who's mentoring another one. So if you think back to your experiences while you're watching the clip, which mentor did you think about? What was your reaction when the two of you met? How did you feel? And chances are you had a lot of the same kinds of feelings that Peter Parker did. Now, the interesting thing with Peter Parker and the relationship he had with Tony Stark is that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe of films, Spider-Man doesn't start off with his own movie. He's actually embedded in somebody else's movie. You get a few minutes in that movie to get you really excited about the prospect of seeing Spider-Man a bit more. All right? And if he pulls it off and does get you excited about seeing more Peter Parker, then he gets his own movies and he gets to start telling his own stories. But along the way, before he gets to tell his own stories, he gets a lot of help from his mentor, the person who takes him under his wing. That person gives him the tools that he needs to be a great superhero. That person conceptualizes what it's like to be a superhero, what it's like to be on a team of superheroes, and what does that entail? What are the roles and responsibilities? And all of this mentoring facilitates the degree to which Peter Parker goes from Peter Parker to Spider-Man. And this is how we all start. And this is a picture of two of my mentors, Wendy Silverman, my mentor in my undergraduate years, Alan Kazdan, my mentor in my grad school years. I was embedded in their labs. I was embedded in their stories. They equipped me with the tools that I would need to start telling my own stories. And once I was able to transition from their laboratories to my own laboratory, then I had a really good sense of what it was like to fit within academia and where I fit within that. That's where all of us start, and therefore our missions our mission in doctoral and postdoctoral training is to identify a mentor who fits your needs, fits your learning style, whose work exists in a universe of work that embodies a lot of what we're motivated to do and curious about in the research space. Now, notice what I've done here so far. Not one time have I talked about programs, Ph.D. in this, Ph.D. in that, different kinds of training programs. So why am I not talking about the training programs? Because the mentor makes the difference in what you learn about this work, the discipline in which you're embedded in, and where you fit within the larger scholarship. And if you go back to the introduction that I just finished doing, go back to that website, Large Hadron Collider. People who study topics related to the Big Bang and dark matter and things like that within the physics and astrophysics space are answering specific questions, but those questions within any one study are usually related to a larger goal, larger set of questions that have the potential to bring people who are interested in similar things that are looking at those questions from very different lenses. And so if you're somebody who's interested in the Big Bang Theory and understanding the mechanisms that underlie the creation of our universe, then chances are you'd like to learn not only from physicists and astrophysicists, but also mathematicians, computer scientists, astrobiologists, all these different kinds of people interested in very similar questions. By thinking about scholarly work in this way, it greatly expands your options for thinking about work, above and beyond just simply creating lists of different doctoral and postdoctoral training programs. Every one of these people, everyone who's interested in what is the universe made of, is part of a universe of other scholars that are doing work in that similar space. And they can come from a variety of different disciplines, but their larger questions overlap considerably. And if you think about it that way, then every mentor is kind of like a galaxy in that larger universe. Within that galaxy, you start seeing connections, not only with that galaxy in the larger universe, but also connections of independent pieces of work produced in that galaxy. And I like to think of those independent pieces of work and their interconnections as solar systems. And every solar system has a few different kinds of things. There's a burning question, a star that we call, that's the larger question, what is the universe made of, that drives the scholarship that's produced from it. The specific pieces of work that stem from that question are kind of like planets. They're concrete pieces of work that you think are great examples of the larger question that drives all of your work. Now, to bind those two elements together, the star and the planets, you need an answer to your burning question. What is the answer to what is the universe made of? That answer is kind of taken up by your theoretical framework. It's the best answer you have for your burning question. And in many respects, the different planets in the solar system are designed to be the ways in which, or examples of which, you pose or you test the burning question and the theoretical framework that seeks to explain it. So every mentor has a central node in that galaxy, a core idea, a core burning question, and all the different solar systems embedded in that galaxy spin off from that larger question and are kind of like independent questions of their own, with different planets accompanying them. Now, this conceptualization works for trying to understand scholarship produced within mentoring relationships, in large part because your work kind of fits in as one of those solar systems. So we'll get to that later on in this workshop and in the workshops to follow. But all of this basically results in this take-home message that I like people to think about. Apply to galaxies, apply to mentors, not graduate programs. Apply to galaxies, not graduate programs. Here's another way to think about this. Think back to when you were in high school, and think back to one of the last times that you might have had like a knockdown, drag-out argument with one of your parents. very common to happen during adolescence, really intense arguments, normative among families. I think that's the last one you had. Maybe you ran back into your room and you flung yourself on your bed, buried your head in your pillow, and you thought something like, "I wish I could choose my own parents." Well, now's your chance. This is your opportunity now to identify the galaxy that's right for you, and that can facilitate your training and professional development. And at the end of the day, when you go to look for work afterwards, your first postdoctoral position, your first academic position, the person who's going to be vouching for you is that mentor, that set of mentors who's been guiding your work over the years. This way of looking at things, Galaxies, not graduate programs, greatly expands your options for understanding mentorship within the research space, because then you're no longer tethered to a discipline. Think about all the different disciplines where mentors could come from. If you're interested in mental health, psychology, psychiatry, social work, pediatrics, public health, epidemiology. The disciplines are many, school psych, education. The disciplines are many, and the mentors are embedded in all the different kinds of programs. So this dramatically increases your potential. So that's our larger conceptualization of mentorship. And then another question might pop up. Well, I hear you on making lists of mentors rather than programs, but how do I decide between mentors? What sets them apart? Well, there's a variety of things that distinguish mentors from each other. And one of the biggest ones, one of the ones that I encourage you to think about first and foremost, is what that mentor's burning question is. What's that larger question that drives their work? And you might ask yourself, what does that look like? What does a burning question look like? It's not like these burning questions are listed on mentors' websites. It's really hard to get a sense of what that larger question that drives their work might be. You might get a sense of their research interest, but what is it like to work in that lab? What is that larger mission like? So what I like to do when I start introducing these ideas of burning questions is to model it, to give you an idea of what these questions look like. And so I'm going to talk for a few minutes and give you a brief overview of what our lab does, so you can get a sense of what burning questions might look like. So, if you look at our work, you break it down to the most basic element. Our lab is really interested in why different people often observe the same behaviors in different ways. So I'm a clinical psychologist by training. The way this larger question manifests is in mental health assessments that I administer in our work. And when I want to get a sense of how a child or an adolescent is thinking, feeling, and behaving, I'll ask a series of questions to that adolescent about how they think, feel, and behave. And then I'll ask a lot of the same questions, I'll pose a lot of the same questions to significant others in their lives, usually parents and teachers or their peers. And there's this long line of work going back 50 years that yields, that reveals an interesting, a robust insight. And that's this. You often get different answers from all these different people, depending on who you ask. You might come to fundamentally different conclusions as to which children and adolescents might need care. Among those who need care, what should care look like? Should I target anxiety, ADHD, depression? Among those who start receiving care, is care actually working when I start monitoring treatment response? And at the end of the day, when I've delivered services to a host of children and adolescents, what techniques, on average, tend to bring about the most benefits for clients? The answers to that question, those questions change fundamentally, oftentimes, depending on who you rely on to answer the question, whose data you rely on. And so, in our work, the larger question of why do different informants, like parents, teachers, and adolescents, provide discrepant reports about a child and adolescent mental health, is a really important question to ask. And the answer to that question is deceptively simple. Children and adolescents lead complex lives. What do I mean by that statement? So in a lot of our work, we study anxiety in adolescents, and particularly social anxiety. It's an intense fear and avoidance of situations, usually involving unfamiliar people. And so I might have an adolescent who comes into our lab who experiences really intense symptoms of distress and impairment in large performance-based context with a high degree of expectations. You really understand the rules of the game. You know what it's like to give a good speech in front of an audience. That same person might do pretty well when you shrink the audience down to one person and you're really only interacting with somebody like a school counselor or a teacher or somebody like that. I might have another adolescent who comes in and they actually do okay in these large group settings because they don't have to focus on one person. They can distract themselves. They can look off as their guests are giving the talk. The symptoms and impairment distress is kept to a relative minimum relative to the rest of the social environment. But in other social environments where you shrink the audience down to one person, that's where the symptoms and impairments show. I might have an adolescent who does really well in either one of these structured contexts because you usually have a really good idea what the rules of engagement are. You know what it's like to comport yourself socially here. And where they show symptoms and impairment is when you take all the structure out, you take all the rules of the game out, and they're in a social event where they're not quite sure what it's like to meet friends, to make friends and influence people. All three of those adolescents might function quite well, or they likely function quite well, when they're with a bunch of people that they know really well as their friends. And so in the service of answering our larger question, we ask ourselves, you know, if adolescents behave this way, you know, should I really expect the same answers, regardless of whether or not you observe adolescents in these different settings? Do we really think that adolescents behave the exact same way across settings and other and social contexts generally? And so in our work, we know this to be true. Adolescents are quite unique in their clinical presentations. They vary considerably from context to context between each other and also within any one adolescent. And where we struggle and where the larger field struggles is in really trying to understand how to make sense of this uniqueness in clinical presentation when in other contexts like research contexts, like our research design classes or our research methods classes, we're either told, either implicitly or explicitly, that the degree to which a hypothesis you pose, either in the clinic or the laboratory, is supported really depends on whether or not a bunch of different information sources are corroborating each other. They're pointing in the same direction. So in a lot of our work, we're really trying to get a way of distinguishing empirically those situations where the times in which different information about discrepant reports mean something and when it's probably methodological noise. So that gives you an idea about what our larger burning question is. And what I encourage you to do, if you're in that process of finding a mentor, whether it's in your doctoral work or your postdoctoral training, you know, I would encourage you to start developing a habit of reading work in journals that you find interesting, and doing that in a 4-week kind of cycle where look, this is a habit. Habits shouldn't take that long. Something like 30 minutes a week. You know, something that doesn't take all that much time. 30 minutes, 60 minutes, something like that. Maybe in week 1, you start perusing the tables of contents of those journals, and then you start picking out abstracts that caught your eye, and then maybe highlighting those. Do that for a full week. That next week, start reading those abstracts, because then you'll wind up highlighting some that you actually want to read the full paper, right? And others you're going to set aside. In that 3rd week, you know, just select the ones that you highlighted because of the abstract, and then read the whole article. And then in that week 4, just do one more perusal of those articles. And this time, instead of focusing on the work, you're focusing on the reference sections, because what you're going to wind up finding are titles of things, of articles that are cited in that work that are related to the work you just read that you want to read further, right? Why am I suggesting this? So I'm suggesting this because within a few weeks, you start to get a handle on the kinds of things you find interesting, the kinds of burning questions that pique your attention. You're going to start finding a lot of the same articles, a lot of the same authors are co-authoring those articles, and you're going to see patterns of authors who tend to be referenced or cited in a lot of the articles that you wind up reading in full. And then the questions you're answering are pretty straightforward. Among these authors, who I keep on flagging, who I keep on identifying, are any of them in doctoral programs to which I can submit an application. And in particular, in the year I'm applying, does it just so happen that the people I'm highlighting are also taking students? Usually that information is available on a prospective mentor's website and things like that. Now, what this is going to let you do is start developing a long list of potential mentors to which you might submit an application. Right? But this really only comprises the beginning of your search, because all we've been talking about so far are shared interests, shared burning questions, things that you're interested in, things they're interested in. And what I'll impress upon you is that there may be a variety of circumstances where you identify mentors whose questions overlap with your own, who have particular compositions and characteristics within their laboratory and their larger mentoring style that might either fit with how you learn best or not. It's important to make those things distinguishable going forward. So a key element of the advice that we give in terms of selecting and working with mentors is conceptualizing or measuring these kinds of characteristics that distinguish mentors from each other with a framework that we call the STAR framework. It's kind of like a heuristic for detecting these variations among mentors. These aren't the only factors that distinguish mentors from each other, but they're key factors that tend to distinguish mentors from each other. And so what we're going to do is go through each one of them in succession. We're going to start off with the pretty straightforward one, size. Laboratories vary considerably in how big they are at any one time or how big they've gotten over time. And so this factor ranges considerably from these large, expansive galaxies with lots of different solar systems, lots of different students and postdocs, all the way down to like these small kind of intimate settings where there are relatively few solar systems going on at any one time, or in terms of the overall history of the mentor's lab or the research team. This size factor is not perfectly correlated with mentoring style, but it tends to be related to mentoring style. And what I mean by mentoring style is what we call kind of loose or hands-off mentoring, and tight and hands-on mentoring. Where loose is somebody who cares about your training, who wants you to see you grow into the scholar you have the potential to become. But they tend to meet a little bit less often with students and give them a bit more leeway on the kinds of questions that drive their work. That's one extreme on this continuum, and then on the other end is what we call tight supervision, where mentors might meet with students a bit more often, and there usually is a closer link between where the student's burning question and the mentor's burning question. These extremes tend to be correlated, not perfectly correlated, with the experience of the mentor, where the longer a mentor is a mentor, the more likely they are to take on a loose mentoring style for a variety of reasons, many of which including that as mentors gain experience, they oftentimes gain more responsibilities, and usually taking on a loose mentoring style facilitates the development of serving multiple roles and administrative roles, editorial boards of journals, grant management, things like that, while also still being able to mentor students. Then you got the time factor, and I like to distinguish the time factor in terms of the quantity of time. So how often mentors meet with you, and for how long, on a weekly basis, bi-weekly basis, for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, what have you. I like to distinguish that factor from the quality factor. So how well do mentors use that time, that mentoring time, that regular face time they have with their students? It's kind of like a 2x2 table, in that somebody can be like a high quantity, low quality mentor, or the reverse, or both these things. And you tend to notice that mentors who have a loose kind of mentoring style tend to have high quality meeting time, even if the quantity time tends to be on the lower side. So I think this accurately captures my mentoring relationship with my doctoral advisor, Alan Kasdan. We met on a regular basis, but it didn't, as time went on during my doctoral training, it tended to be less and less frequently. But I'll tell you with full confidence that every single one of my meetings with him, from the beginning of my training to the end, felt like a great use of my time, even if it was only for a few minutes, because he just had a knack for being able to get to the heart of the issue that drove our meeting together in a relatively short period of time. You can contrast that with somebody with a more tight mentoring style, where maybe the meetings happen on a regular basis, weekly, individual meetings, group meetings, all these different kinds of meetings. And then even if the quality could improve over time, nonetheless, tight mentoring styles, tend to yield substantial benefits to students, so long as it fits their learning style, which we'll get into in a few minutes. The A in the STAR framework is area. It's a little different than size. Size is, expanse. Area is kind of like the spread. It's the spread of solar systems among each other. A mentor with a tight mentoring style tends to have a pretty narrow area, where they have a larger question that students are interested in, and the students pursue questions that look a lot like that question. They may not be identical, but they're close. A mentor with a wider mentoring style, a mentor that tends to have a loose mentoring style, tends to have a wider area, where mentor students, you can tell from the articles that the students produce while under the mentor's mentorship, you'll notice oftentimes that these students are pursuing questions that look pretty different from the larger question that appears to drive the mentor's work. And there's all variation in between these things. These are all usually extremes on a continuum. And the last part of the framework, really important part, resources. So every lab, beyond their size, the time that mentors allocate to mentoring, and the area, vary considerably on at least two different levels of resources. And it's important to think about what these are, because these are going to be the tools that you'll use to not only produce work, but think about your next steps post-training. So you have your tangible resources, the material resources for carrying out scholarly work, and that can include the client populations which that mentor studies, access to archival data from previous studies or ongoing studies, equipment, money, things like that. But then you also have the intangible resources. Those are important to look at too. How many students has that mentor provided training to? What kinds of collaborations do they have with other mentors, other colleagues either in that same department or in other units on campus or other campuses? And I like to distinguish the tangible from the intangible, because a mentor might have relatively fewer tangible resources for carrying out work, but they might also have these substantial intangible resources, people you can reach out to for essentially free advice on how to carry out the work, former students and things like that. What I'd like to do is assign a little bit of homework right now. So after our time together, I encourage you to take this framework and then apply it to the labs you're currently in. Maybe you're in an undergraduate lab and you're about to apply to grad school. Maybe you're currently in a lab and you're working with a mentor. Take this framework and start getting a sense of where they fit there. That's gonna give you some practice on how to apply this framework as you start answering key questions for yourself. Where should I apply for doctoral training? With whom should I apply to work under during doctoral training or postdoctoral training? And what is my current mentoring environment like? So we have a sense of mentors burning questions. We have a sense of this larger framework, and then the question is, how do you find mentors who fit your preferences. There's a few strategies we're going to go over. And one of the big ones is knowing your learning style. Now, the evidence isn't all that strong that matching learning styles to students' needs in, say, primary school, or secondary, K through 12, there isn't a lot of strong evidence indicating that actually improves academic achievement and learning outcomes. But I tend to think that graduate training is a bit different, in part because of the closely knit relationship between the mentor and their mentee. One of the big ones to think about is knowing your learning style. When you think back to your prior experiences in the classroom or in a laboratory environment, do you tend to see yourself as the kind of person who really likes learning things on their own? So given some direction on what to do, but then being left to your own devices in terms of figuring it out for yourself. Do you learn better that way? And you go back to mentors for questions and things like that. Because if so, chances are you might find mentors with a loose supervision style to be kind of the right fit for you. Alternatively, are you the kind of person that tends to learn better when given more explicit directions? If that's the case, then maybe somebody who's in that tight supervision space might be the best fit for you. And if you're kind of uncertain about what to do, there's nothing keeping you from applying to mentors with different kinds of styles and then seeing how that fits for you. And then what I'll say with full confidence that regardless of this learning style, regardless of your approach, any one of these styles produces fantastic professionals. But the trick is to figure out the fit between yourself and potential mentors. I'm going to give a hard pitch to this second strategy. When you're trying to get a sense of mentors, it's really important to search the public record. Mentors develop histories. Mentors develop records. And the great news about that is that gives considerable power to prospective students. Because if a mentor is right for you, that track record of theirs is going to reveal it. And by track record, I mean, among prior students, do they publish articles with the mentor? And if so, do you see connections with them? Do students have the opportunity to submit training grants? You can find that information on student CVs, mentor CVs, NIH reporter if it's an NRSA application, like an F31 application. And do these students actually get jobs? We're going to go into some of these things a bit later on when we start thinking about how these strategies work in action. There's a third strategy that you usually really only start applying to making decisions about mentors at the interview stage, when you're actually allowed during the application process to start asking questions, direct questions of mentors and mentor students. Now, asking questions of mentor students is an interesting process because labs rarely have more than 5 or 10 students at a time. A really large lab might have 10. Most labs at any one time is going to have somewhere between 2 and 5 students. And new labs might only have 1 student. When you think about that size, think about what it would be like if mentors had like a Yelp page, and the only people who contribute to the Yelp page are their current and former students. If something negative is said in a qualitative sense, like what is it like to work with this mentor? Don't get me started. If something like that is set out in public, it's really easy for those kinds of that kind of bad news to get back to the source. And so what you'll often see in these circumstances, if you ask a question that warrants a qualitative response, like what is it like to work with this mentor, you're going to get one of these things where it's at best you're getting information from the nonverbal. Something like, let's say it's a mentor that doesn't have a really great relationship with a student. You ask the student this question, the student's going to say something like, great, something like that. It's going to be some kind of like brace yourself and then tell the best lie possible. So here I would suggest instead to ask questions about objective elements of the mentoring relationship. If a mentoring relationship is going well, what does that relationship look like? What do good relationships look like? Well, good relationships look like the following. There's regular meetings with a student, time spent in those meetings. The student can lay out exactly the schedule they have with the mentor. The student can probably tell you ongoing projects, and you can sense, you know, what they're involved in those projects based on how in depth they can get into it. You can ask students, you know, are you working on a training grant, like an NRSA application or an SF application? You know, the degree to which a student can give you concrete answers to these questions is going to reveal a lot about that mentoring relationship, and way more than if you were to ask a qualitative question like how are they to work with. And then once you get a sense of each of these mentors and where they fall in this framework, you know, you're going to realize something, that mentors, a mentor that you think fits really, really well is going to fit on a few of these factors, but not all of them. I mean, that's usually a very rare event. And I kind of think about it kind of the way that people talk about real estate. You know, when people think about, you know, pursuing like an apartment or a house to purchase, a real estate agent, what's the mantra? Location, location, location. Well, that's one of the things that matters when you think about real estate, but it's also how much it costs, how old the apartment or the house is, how big, how much square footage there is. And real estate agents will always say, you know, at the end of this, you're going to find a few different properties you'll be interested in, but no one property is going to have everything you want. You're going to have to sacrifice on at least one of these things. Right? There's a file in the Dropbox folder that has this table that I constructed that allows you to kind of like list out mentors, list out burning questions, and then it allows you to sort of like briefly jot down your preferences, like match, plus sign, minus, not match, minus sign on each of the different factors. And, you know, it's kind of almost like an Amazon page, a page on Amazon where you have a bunch of different products and they all have different qualities. And then you see either the checkbox among some qualities and the not checkbox from things that the product doesn't have. And so it's kind of like that same way. It's a way to sort of like briefly sketch out where the points of overlap and mismatches are. And the other question you're asking is, you know, what's the proof that they can actually be a good mentor for me? There's where you go on a big Google Scholar spree. You start looking at publications from the mentor students. You start looking at a couple of characteristics. Do the articles that students publish, do they have any, or how many do they have where they're listed as first author, where the indication is quite clear, the student took a leading role on that particular piece of work. Let's say there's a few pieces of work that any one student produces. Do you see overlap in what the student did? Or alternatively, is the student testing one question over here and another question over there, lots of variation, and it's really hard to see where the connection might be. You know, this is all in the service of looking at not only do students publish work, you know, under the mentor supervision where it's pretty clear that they took a leading role, but do they build on one another? Are there themes? And if a mentor is a new mentor, maybe you're one of their first students and they just started, it's useful there to then look back to the mentor's papers, and then see, do you see themes in their work? Because if you see the themes cut across their articles, then chances are they're going to do a pretty decent job being able to mentor their own doctoral students. But if you don't see those themes for their own work, that might give you some pause as to what they may be able to do. Now, once you get to that spot where you're really starting to boil down, really start to hone down that list of mentors, you know, then it's important to go back to look at those articles that first drew you to them, those burning question articles, the things that got you really excited about the work that they do. You were likely excited by the content, what they were studying and what they found. Now it's important to go back and look at the structure. How do they get to the place where they test a question and they have an answer, right? What do the procedures look like? You know, how do they administer the measures? How do they analyze the data? You know, what kinds of client populations do they test their questions within? By asking these questions, then you start asking, well, you know, from the outside, do I have a sense that I might be excited to do this kind of work? on a day-to-day basis. Now, there may be several different kinds of instances of mentorship that we kind of touched upon briefly just a few minutes ago. And then one of them is whether or not you're likely the mentor's last student, if it's a really experienced mentor, or the first student, if it's a mentor who's just starting out. You know, these might be great places to do work. I can think of a number of different students who fit in either one of these buckets, who wind up doing really great things with their mentor. You know, new mentors, you know, if you like being in that place where, you know, you're just starting out in a laboratory is just starting out around the same time you are, you're starting to build up what the experimental paradigms look like, the measures you're selecting. If the idea of starting something like that from the ground up is something that you're excited to think about doing, then maybe a new mentor would be great. You know, on the other hand, if a mentor is probably making it pretty clear they're going to retire pretty soon, maybe one of their last students, then it's important to think about, well, what have they been doing the last few years? Have they been pursuing new ideas? Have they been birthing new solar systems? Do you notice them forming collaborations with other galaxies that wasn't present before earlier on in their career? Those kinds of signals should be telling you, yeah, they might only be doing this for a few more years, but they're busy and they're testing new things, thinking about new things, which is a marker of curiosity and excitement for the work. It's still there's still a lot of activity in this galaxy. Might be a useful place to do work. One of the last questions you're asking is basically, how do students turn out? So as you're building this list down, do one more Google spree where you're tracking down each mentor's record and focusing on their previous students. A mentor who really cares about mentorship, who really cares about how the students turn out, is going to have this featured prominently on their website, on their CV, things like that. And the crucial question is looking at students and then saying, does that student, or that student over here, that student over there, those former students, do they have jobs that I would like, that would make me happy, at least from the outside? And when we're working with current mentors, it's important to keep in mind that when you're thinking about applying this framework to a current relationship, it's less about picking a mentor and more about setting your expectations. What's possible to do within this mentoring relationship? How are you going to work most effectively? Or how can you optimize this mentoring relationship so you get the most out of your time and training? And so, you know, the first step is doing the homework that I assigned earlier, sort of map your galaxy, take the STAR framework, conceptualize your mentor's galaxy. That's going to facilitate seeing where you fit in. And we're going to review a resource that's going to facilitate that. And it's called the Me and My Mentor's Galaxy worksheet. There's a worksheet available in the Dropbox folder that can help facilitate this as well. And it allows you to sort of assess your mentoring relationship on these key issues, the burning question, the STAR factor. And then, this is interesting, it helps you, the worksheet facilitates you identifying a current solar system or a previous solar system that exists in the galaxy that kind of fits what you want to do. And what I think would be a great idea is, if you know you're in one of these mentoring relationships right now, I would complete this with your mentor. And so all the different facets there, we're going to go through each of them one by one, but this worksheet is available in the Dropbox folder, and it's designed to sort of allow you to sort of write out in concrete form all these different elements. And so it starts with the burning question. So notice here that we're not talking about your burning question. We're talking about your mentor's burning question. And that's not to mean that your question isn't important. It's more in the service of making it clear to you that if you don't have a burning question right now, that is fine. That is fine if you're about to start grad school. That is fine if you're almost ending grad school. And we'll talk about this idea in more detail later on in the day when we start talking about research programs. And so, so the tools here are really designed to discover that burning question that drives your mentor's work, so that then you can make sense of what's in the realm of the possible in terms of testing questions like your mentor's burning question within that galaxy. Um, so in many respects, I mentioned before a few minutes ago that I had like a mentoring discussion with my internship mentor, Lori Walkslug, and that's where she said, I'm somewhere in the middle of your previous two mentors. That what we're doing with the STAR factor here, the STAR framework, is kind of standardizing that discussion. It's allowing us to sort of instantiate the key elements that are embedded in that conversation that you oftentimes have with mentors from day one. But this sort of makes everything more concrete. So, when it comes time to thinking about these STAR factors, completing the worksheet, you may wind up finding circumstances where there are mismatches between your needs and what the mentor can provide. Sometimes that signals to you that it might be a good time to think about it as co-galaxy. Is there a way for you to get co-mentoring? And that co-mentoring can take a variety of different forms. And if you're in that spot, this way of looking at things allows you to capitalize on what your mentor knows about their galaxy, but it also capitalizes on what what motivates you. We'll talk about, and by the way, we'll talk about co-galaxy stuff in a second. But suffice to say that when you're starting to identify research programs, when you're starting to identify those circumstances, when you see solar systems in the mentor's galaxy that interest you, that allows you to make clear to your mentor, this is the kind of stuff I'm really excited to do. So when you're thinking about examples of research programs, you're trying to figure out if you can assess a given set of papers in terms of like the larger question that prompted the work and all the other elements of it that we discussed previously. But sometimes you realize that that you really can't find a set of work that represents something that you're really interested in within a mentoring program. That's totally fine. It's okay in those circumstances to then go out of that galaxy and find a solar system that in somebody else's galaxy that's maybe a better example of what you want to do. If you do that, sometimes it prompts a really neat discussion, because if a mentor knows that these are the kinds of things that motivate you, plus B, maybe something doesn't quite exist in here that fits, that might result in C, leading to new research ideas that maybe the mentor never thought before, but they're really excited to pursue. So this is and this conversation can manifest regardless of whether or not it's it's a system you identify in the galaxy or outside of it. It might be that some of those initial conversations become the beginnings of what you wind up doing in terms of building a research program. So as you're thinking about the future, it doesn't, I'll reiterate this at several points in time over the course of our time together today. Regardless of where you are in your training, it's perfectly normal to not have this research program specified yet. We'll talk about the times in which these research programs tend to manifest later on when we start talking research programs specifically. But I want to reiterate to you that it is normative within all scholarly disciplines for graduate students and even people in their postdoctoral training years to not necessarily have this figured out for themselves too far in advance. So the trick is to do the following things that we have discussed before. Discover burning questions that are in your galaxy. Find ways to conceptually ground the work you're doing at any one moment, and immerse yourself in the resources that are available to you in order to produce work that you find value in. So there may be a couple of special cases of mentorship that are important to go over, right? One is that if you find a training gap, if you find a gap in your mentor's galaxy that you think could use some filling, it's important to make that clear to your mentor. It might be a weird conversation to have, but it might also result in some really interesting circumstances, because there might be some ways to fill this gap with mentoring from another galaxy that can manifest both formal and informal ways. The the clearest example of how these co-galaxy relationships manifest formally is in training grant applications. Every one of the training grant applications that any of my students have ever submitted have me as a mentor and a colleague of mine as a co-mentor. And so these training applications are great places to figure out concretely, what does that co-mentoring relationship look like? And then they might even help. They might very much help regardless of whether or not the training application gets funded or not. Sometimes you don't need that training application to actually make a co-galaxy relationship work. Sometimes it manifests if you can find a viable co-mentor within the mentor's network or on campus, and that might not even require any formal needs. Might just be mentoring that's done in the context of specific collaborations or more instantiated relationships. For some of you, you might find yourself now or in the future in a mentoring relationship that isn't all that hospitable, and being in an inhospitable galaxy can take a variety of different forms. There may be a personality clash with you and your mentor that's really tough to get through, or a mentor who's unwilling to do any co-mentoring work, even if it's clear that you need it. You know, it's important for you to keep in mind that oftentimes these concerns can't be readily apparent to you until you're in the relationship. So don't use this as an opportunity to blame yourself. Chances are you did all the homework you could have done with the information you had, and this is where you are. But then it's important to think about some strategies you could use. So sometimes one strategy might be consulting a faculty member who's on campus, sort of confiding in them about this issue and any advice they might have about how to address the challenges. And there might be a few different ways you might handle it. Some some students in this context may wind up sort of saying, I'm part of the way through my training. I'm just going to stick with this mentor relationship and finish my training through this mentor. And if you take this route, it's important to seek out students who might be struggling with similar kinds of issues with their mentoring relationships, to seek out support. And because in a large enough campus, you're not going to be alone if you're in a mentoring relationship where you're encountering difficulties. There might be some times where the differences are irreconcilable. It might be really difficult to make things work. And if you decide to leave a mentor in this kind of context, it's important to find a potential new mentor first. So confiding with that mentor, disclosing to them that you have difficulties and you're looking for a new mentoring relationship. This might involve learning a brand new set of procedures, maybe even being in a brand new scholarly galaxy or scholarly universe. So there are some challenges you may encounter, but it might be worthwhile in the long run, particularly if it looks like that mentor winds up being able to fit more of the factors that we've discussed before. So there's another place to use the worksheet that we went over a little while ago. For some of you, after a little while of being in your training, you might realize, you know what, I don't know if I want to do this research career thing. You might also then ask the question, is all that we've been talking about for the last hour worth your time? I would argue it is worth your time, and the reason why is that you're going to wind up getting a lot of practice on thinking about how your training unfolds in almost like a storytelling format. Like a lot of this is in the service of being able for you to articulate what you did during your training, what was valuable, what did you learn, and what tools or attributes did you develop over the course of your training that allow you to fit in your change of plans. Because it turns out that a lot of what researchers do, critical thinking, problem solving, data analysis, a lot of those things lend themselves well to a variety of different industries. And so a lot of the tools you learn today will be useful, even if you transition out into another industry. So that's we're at the conclusion then of our time here together, and I believe we have about 15 minutes left for questions. And so what we're going to do next after this, we talked about identifying your burning question, identifying the work that makes you excited. And then the next step of our time together is going to involve thinking about, how to pursue your passions, how to pursue where you're excited and essentially working your way through the systems that we have in place that are designed to make sure that the work that we disseminate to our colleagues, that our findings, our ideas are sufficient quality, that other people should learn them, know about them besides you. So that system we call peer review. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you found this of use to you. And let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to contact me via email. Send me a tweet. Happy to help in any way that I can. And I'll see you in a few minutes.